We talked a little bit about some of the components of what a strategic planning system is all about.
And one of the things that we believe that is very important is for us to take a look at the respective environments that we operate in.
So today we're going to learn about personality, the differences of personalities, and about relationships.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the HUD OCIO Learning Session. I'm Dr. Melanie Cohen. Today we have a really terrific topic. It's something that we all talk about. We wish we can do better. We don't know how to do better, but we want to do better. And that's the whole idea of communication. How do you communicate with people? What medium do you use? And how do you craft a message for your target audience? So we're very fortunate today. We have with us Dr. Chris Durney. Some of you may recognize Chris from a prior session. He talked to us about 13 months ago about giving good instruction. And the response was so great that he was asked to come back. So it was really fortunate enough that we're able to get him to come back. So let me tell you a little bit about Chris, just a little brief introduction, then he'll get started. Chris has had a career as a consultant to the federal government. And he's been doing that for over 30 years, as well as a career in terms of publishing academic articles. He has a doctorate from George Washington University. And his main focus is on information and information management. So he is probably the perfect person to talk to us today about communicating. So with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be back. Thank you very much. Today, it always intrigues me as we add new communication media to our list of things that we can possibly use, how you make decisions about which one of those you should pick. I had the experience at Christmas time that my kids banded together and bought me a touch-tone phone, a Samsung Galaxy something or other. Up until that time, I had a flip phone, and it did phone and texting was something that was like blew me away. So I figured that was all I needed. Now I have every capability in the world available to me, and it's somewhat daunting. I thought maybe we would talk about how you choose from all those media the right one and what's appropriate for a particular message. And so I thought up a message to Harriet, and we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Before we start, though, I'd like you to participate in a little contest. Here's the basic situation. My daughter came home with this contest, said, we had a contest at school today. How many words can you spell from the word Oriental? She said, here are the words. Here are the rules. All the words must be English words. You can only use each letter once, and you only have 2 minutes. So I got 19 before she stopped me. And I'd like to know how many you can get. Now, I'm not going to hold you to 2 minutes. You can do this in the background, and we'll come back to it as we go. But just keep a little thing and scribble down the number of words that you can get from the word Oriental, following those rules. So the topic today is how you match your message to the right medium. And we're going to talk about why that's an important management challenge. And then we'll talk about media richness theory as the context in which we can make those decisions. Part of it is how we recognize uncertainty and ambiguity in our communications. And so we'll talk about what that means. And then we'll put the traditional media and new media on the media richness scale and see if that can't lend us some insight and some implications about how we can make these kinds of choices as we go. Feel free if you have a question, raise your hand. You're going to have to stand up at the microphone, obviously. But if there's something that I say that's uncertain or ambiguous as we go, I'm sure there won't be anything. But if there is, feel free to ask a question about it. And basically, what we're wondering is there a rule somewhere with all the media that we have to use? Is there a rule that we can use and that we can apply fairly consistently to help us make decisions between one medium and another? Why is it an important challenge? I'm sure you have reasons of your own. The second reason there is one that's near and dear to me, which is that we don't want to look silly. Or as I phrase it, we want to not look silly. The idea is that the paper is filled with examples of people using media inappropriately, right? And when they do, in the serious cases anyway, they jeopardize their entire careers by doing things that are just, sometimes we look at it and you go, how would you do that? But reflex action, habit of not thinking things through, inability to understand the ramifications of one medium over another, all those things enter into those kinds of situations. In addition, we want to make sure that we're understood. Why are we communicating, right? Although I suppose there are times when we're intentionally ambiguous, you know, when you're writing a review of someone who wasn't maybe the best worker in the world, you want to make sure that your language is maybe a little bit hedged. So there are times when we're ambiguous, or you know, when your wife asks you how you like her hat, and you respond, well, that's some hat. You know, sometimes ambiguity is used for a purpose, but most times we want to make sure that we communicate clearly and directly with people. And very importantly, our organizations need good communication to succeed. And because communication costs money, you have to think about every communication that you make having a cost to it, right? It's a cost in time, it's a cost in maybe whatever the exchange is, but there's a coordination cost that comes with every communication you have. Our organizations need good communication to be successful, and they need that to be the least costly communication that we can have. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Oh, don't you love animations? So at the basis of today's discussion is the premise that communication is hard, right? There are a number of things that we want to make sure that when we talk about communication, that we consider. So there's the sender, and there's the receiver, there's the medium we use, obviously. But there's the message that's up here in the back of my head, if you start on the left side with the confusion that the fellow's feeling. And then he's going to leave a message that says, that he thinks expresses his confusion, right? I think there's some great things we have to get clear. And then that passes through the medium, and of course, in the medium, there's noise that occurs, and the receiver gets it and has to decode it. In this case, maybe wishful thinking on the part of decoder, there are some great wings to go with the beer that we're going to drink, and the decoder is grateful. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been in many, many situations where this kind of breakdown of communication has happened. I worked with a man one time who was the senior vice president for technology. I was his executive assistant. We had a very difficult discussion with one of our colleagues. The colleague had to go, actually. He was failing in his job. His group was not producing at the level that he was supposed to produce at. And I went in, but this guy, my boss, could not handle those kinds of discussions. He just wasn't good at it. So I went into him and talked to him and said, here's the discussion you have to have. Here's the communication. You have to be very blunt with this guy. And I rehearsed it like for half an hour before their meeting took place. And as the fellow emerged, as the subject emerged from my boss's office, I waved him into my office, and he came in, he sat down, and I said, well, how'd it go? Expecting him to be ashen, and like shaking. He said, oh, it went pretty good. He just wants me to improve my reporting a little bit in this area. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that this message had gone so far awry that this fellow, who was right on the edge of being asked to leave, was actually feeling pretty good about this conversation in the morning. So there's a lot that goes wrong with our communications. We're going to focus today on the medium, but I just wanted to remind you of a couple of things that I know you have. I know you keep these things in mind anyway, but I just wanted to point out from the point of view of the speaker, right, who's the sender of the message. Do you avoid the curse of knowledge? So what is the curse of knowledge? Well, once you know something, it's very, very difficult to remember what it was like not to know it. When we tend to communicate with each other, we tend to remember, or we tend to think that we're very clear, but we're talking from a perspective of somebody who knows the answer. And it's very hard to listen with the perspective of somebody that hasn't heard this before. So there was a little experiment done by a woman at Stanford University called the tapping experience. Does anyone know that story? Okay, so you might actually try this. It's not a bad experience. But what she did was divide the group of study participants into two, the tappers and the listeners, tappers and the guessers maybe or something. And then she said, she gave each of the tappers a familiar tune. So, and they tapped it out to the listener, and then they guessed how many people would know what that tune was, okay? And the tappers always guessed the high. 50% of the people would guess that tune because they were tapping from their own knowledge. How many of you got that tune that I just tapped out?
I didn't even get that tune.
Let me do it again. Let me see. I'm not musical, but all right, but I do know this song. Who said happy birthday? Okay. See, there were still some stunned faces out there, right? It's the whole idea.
There still are.
Yeah. Now you tap it for somebody else later on today, and you'll say, "How can you not get that?"
Right.
It's like, how can you miss that? It was so clear. Sometimes our communications are exactly like that. You know, we're so.
Can I offer a story here with this?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I didn't realize I never realized it was called the curse of knowledge. And so each year I attend an academic conference, and it's management professors and management scholars from around the world. So I had come back from this conference. I was talking to somebody here, and I was talking about how wonderful it was and how much I learned. And she said to me, "It must have been so great to be around people who know what you're talking about." And I thought, around people who know what I'm talking about? Doesn't everyone know? What do you mean around people who know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm not speaking clearly? Yeah. And so it kind of took me aback. I wasn't sure if I should be insulted or not, or I don't know what that meant. But I guess what I learned from that was maybe there is a lot of ambiguity in what I'm talking about, because maybe I'm talking in some ways that aren't so clear. So it was a great lesson for me to realize not everybody knows what I know, and to sort of kind of hone that message myself.
I think it's something important from the point of view of really grasping the fact that if we want people to understand, you have to work at making sure you communicate at their level.
Right.
And they don't know the technical knowledge you do, and that,
right.
You know, the little things that just roll off our tongues, let's say. But from the listener point of view, we also have what we call the intelligence trap. This actually works both ways. This is from Edward de Bono. I don't know if you know him. He's a writer on creativity. By the way, the previous story came from Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, Heath and Heath. It's a sweet book called Made to Stick. When I listen, do I avoid the intelligence trap? Well, the intelligence trap has some aspects to it that if you look at this, you're going to recognize your own behavior, I'll guarantee. There are a couple of things on here that I'd like to point out. How many times have you sat in a meeting with someone that you know it is just so pleased with their own cleverness that they're not listening to you, they're thinking up the next jab, right? Or how many times have you listened, or how many times have you listened preparing your next line or your next contradiction? You know, I agree with you, but how many times have you said, unfortunately, my kids will sometimes say to me, Dad, I agree with you, but, you know, and it's a reminder that they're mimicking. There are a number of things that we do. We jump to conclusions. I don't want to say anyone here ever jumps to conclusions, but, or when you fill in the gaps, I know what you're going to say. Are you really listening? You're not really participating as much as you can. But those are interesting, and we're not here to talk about the interesting things we're here to talk about. Remind me to get rid of the animations the next time. We're here to talk about the media and how we select the right media, because misselection of media can really cause significant problems for us. We're going to use media richness theory as the context for this discussion. And media richness theory was developed in the mid-'80s by two fellows, two professors of organizational development, Richard Daft and Robert Langville. And Melanie, I think you're still using Richard Daft's.
Right. Richard Daft is quite famous in terms of, certainly in terms of textbook writing.
Right.
So yeah, so we use his book called Organizational Theory. He's very well known.
Yeah. They both are still practicing, as far as I know. And they published two articles that are cited there at the bottom of this slide. And Melanie, if you will send her an email, we'll send out the copies of these slides to you.
Right,
so.
right. They'll go out to everybody right after the session.
Okay. And these two articles were very influential in creating this notion of media richness theory, which we'll talk about. The other night, I went to Blues Alley to hear my friend Chris perform. Ooh, I'm not sure how that got in there, but we may come back to that. Anyone here been to Blues Alley? Yeah, it's a nice place, isn't it? It's lovely. So I want to remind you that media choice is influenced by many things. So we're going to come, you know, when we talk about media richness theory, it's going to sound maybe overly simplistic. But it's not because we don't understand that media choice is influenced by many things. The context, for instance. Every message is conditioned by messages that came before. So if somebody sends you a text message, the context is going to suggest you send a text message back, whether it's the right medium or not. Social familiarity, if you know somebody well, you might get away with a message that's a little bit using a medium that's less rich because you know the person, you have the context. And there's habit too that enters in here. Going back to the social familiarity reminds me of my kids, you know. We've learned to send them texts instead of calling them on the phone because they'll respond to the text message. They won't answer the phone. So there's something going on about that. We might send them a text message and say, please call me. Anyway, the urgency and the time and distance all influence what you're going to do in terms of your selection of media. So we know that. And then there are also some who argue with media richness. There's been a lot of studies since the mid-'80s on this, and there are other competing theories of communication, and some complain that it doesn't explain real choices, and that if you look at real choices, people don't follow media richness theory. We still think there's value in it, because if you think about the rule that we're going to establish at the end here of the day, it comes from the theory that there's ambiguity in communications, and nobody can really deny that. So there's a prescriptive value in considering this context. So what is media richness theory? Well, Daft and Lange say that organizations process information to do these three things. They want to accomplish internal tasks. They need to work together, right? And they need to interpret the things that are going on around them. So there's that getting the work done, working with others, and figuring out what's coming in that's going to influence us as we go forward. And you can break down most of organizational communication, according to Daft and Lange, to these things. And while they're doing those things, they say we communicate for two reasons. The first is to reduce uncertainty. So in making sure that we can work together, in making sure that, that we have the right tasks and that we can get those tasks done, and in interpreting the external environment, there's a certain amount of uncertainty involved in all of that. And in order to get those things done, we have to reduce that uncertainty, okay? Second thing is that we have to resolve ambiguity. That sometimes, or what they call equivocality. So they use the word equivocality, which means multiple voices, multiple interpretations. We're going to use ambiguity because it's a little easier for us to deal with. But the basic idea is that there are multiple interpretations in something ambiguous. So what's an example of uncertainty? Well, if you think about it, we know all the factors that go into hurricanes. We can't necessarily predict where they're going to hit, but there's nothing ambiguous about where they hit, when they hit, right? There's not multiple interpretations. When they hit the shoreline, meteorologists know precisely where it is. The uncertainty has been removed, or has been totally reduced. So prior to it hitting, there's a lot of uncertainty. Once that storm hits, the uncertainty tends to go away. That's an example of uncertainty versus ambiguity. Or here at HUD, let's say, how many veterans have been helped by a particular HUD program? Well, you have projections, as you can see, that they're uncertain projections, and then you have the reality. Once you're through that period of time, you can measure what you've done, and you know with certainty where you are on that particular curve. Again, a question of uncertainty. So what uncertainty is we lack information that we know we need. We need that particular information, and we know we lack it. And there's a difference between the amount of information we have on hand and the amount of information we need to do our job. But we usually know where to go to get that information, or how long we have to wait maybe for it to come, what kind of instruments we need to maybe measure it. The situation is known. Situation's pretty structured, right? I put badging, getting a person a badge, for instance. Everyone in every federal agency knows that there's a structured process for getting a badge. Maybe uncertain how long it's going to take, but everybody knows what the steps are to get there. So there's some structure involved that you can repeat over and over. And the variables are fairly limited. When you have a lot of variables, what do you have? You have multiple influence and confounding ideas and so on. But when you have just a few variables, you can sometimes figure out the relationships and know that if you understand the variables, you'll get the result that you want. So those are examples of uncertainty. What's an example of ambiguity? Remember our contest at the start that you've been keeping to the side? I just would like a show of hands. How many of you got more than 4 words? And those of you that are watching online,
right, raise your hand.
Please be honest with
right.
us. How many of you got more than 4 words? Let's see. What do we got? 60% maybe of people
Yeah,
with their
probably
hands
about
up?
60% of the people
Okay.
here.
How many of you got 4 or less words? Okay, and then how many of you didn't raise your hand?
We have a small percentage that, right, that didn't raise their hand.
So the percentage of more than 4 goes up, I think, because we had some undecideds out there. Okay, so I would just like to ask any of you who got more than 4, how you got more than 4 with the instructions that we had. And if you remember,
And if you, there were a couple people in here that raised their hand, so if you want to come to the microphone and tell us, that would be great. You can share that.
Hello.
hi.
Hello.
My mother and I used to play this game called Boggle, and it's pretty much a similar type of strategy, and I'm also extremely competitive, so I just went to work as soon as you said go.
So how many words did you get?
I got 33.
Wow.
33. Holy cow.
Oh, man.
Wow. Wow.
So why did I give this example as an example of ambiguity? Does anyone recognize the instruction that is the ambiguous one?
I can tell you I got 3 words.
You got 3.
I got 3, and she got 33.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Go ahead, stand up.
I wasn't sure whether proper names, proper nouns, or specific people's names would count or not. So I put a few down and then I moved on to other things.
Ah, interesting.
Okay.
All right, but you weren't limited by the 4 somehow. You were just limited by proper names. Yes. Okay. All right, good. Anything else? Yeah, Mike.
Just, yeah, please go to the microphone so the internet audience can hear.
So I didn't write it down, but I thought there was something about you could only use a letter once.
Okay, you can only use the letter once. So we're talking ambiguity, right? Now, I sort of suckered you in by saying I got 19, which sort of led you to believe that you could use letters once per word, not just once, right? But I was suckering you because I also told you I got 19 before she stopped me. She could have stopped me and said, whoa, you're way over because you're using letters more than once. When you think about it, it's easy to take a simple statement like that and miss the ambiguity in it. And that's a very, very important concept. My daughter, who has attention deficit, who was in 3rd grade, and the teacher called us and said, we need to talk about Caitlin. I should mention her name. Hey, Caitlin. Sorry, darling. So we went to talk to the teacher. We sat down, and the teacher said, sometimes Caitlin comes from things from like left field. So I said, Caitlin, give me an example of Caitlin doing that. She said, fine. We read a story in which a boy and a girl make a bet, and the boy loses the bet, but he doesn't have any money. So he mows lawns, and he bags groceries in order to get the money. Then he pays off the bet. And then we gave a test, and the question was, what does the boy have to do to pay off the bet? And so I said, well, what was Caitlin's answer? Thinking she couldn't miss the answer, which is that he had to bag groceries and mow the lawn. And the teacher said, he had to lose the bet. See how she comes from right field all the time? Well, my wife happened to be sitting there, and we're all lucky people because we have mothers, and not just fathers. Because I was ready to say, whoa, what a crazy answer that was. But her mother, my dear wife, says, wait a minute, that's a good answer. Because sure enough, if he didn't lose the bet, he wouldn't have had to pay it off. So if you're talking about the first thing he had to do, it was to lose the bet. That kind of ambiguity is so much around us that we take lack of ambiguity for granted, and we think we're communicating well. Let me just give you another example. Here's a quote from Mother Jones. Anyone recognize the ambiguity in this particular quote about homeless? Okay, if you look at it and it says 30% are thought, right? 30% are thought to be mentally ill. Well, I'm sure there's a bunch of information behind that, but they've got a pie chart there. And when we have a pie chart in front of us, we usually think precision, right? But they've couched that ambiguity. What do you do with information like that? How can you react to it? Do you go out and proclaim that 30% of all homeless people are mentally ill? You can't, based on this ambiguity, but a lot of people will look at that and they'll jump to that conclusion, right? So I don't want to belabor the point too much, but ambiguity exists when there are multiple conflicting interpretations. And those often come from the different mental models of the people who are communicating, okay? Because they're hearing different things. They're hearing those words in different contexts, even though the words they think mean the same thing. The situation is unstructured. Think about the difference between getting someone badged and writing a novel. You know, writing a novel is something that doesn't have necessarily rules or guidelines. You know, you can read a book, but that doesn't, you can read a book on writing a novel, doesn't mean you're gonna get the novel written or that it's gonna be any good. And the questions and how to get them are not clear. As they were in the case of uncertainty, they were very clear. You just didn't have the information on hand. Here they're not clear. You're doing something for the first time. You're not exactly sure what the output's gonna be or what the outcome's gonna be. And then finally, there are multiple variables in something that's ambiguous. So you don't know which of those variables is really causing the effect because they're interacting in such strange ways. So where do these things come from? And where does the ambiguity and uncertainty come from? Well, Daft and Langle, in their theory, give you 4 places to look for it. The one I want to point out are the differences between, I mean, we know we have individual differences, right? And that's obviously a source of uncertainty. The more you have, the more differences you have, obviously the more uncertainty you're going to have. Well, you also have interactions with other departments in your jobs, thinking from a professional point of view. Sometimes those departments are very similar to you, right? I may be in a information technology organization under the OCIO. There may be an information technology organization under some program. When we interact together, we speak the same language. However, if I interact with the program, there's a bigger difference because their mission is different than mine as an information technologist. So the differences in terms of the culture and the background all contribute to uncertainty and ambiguity. I want you to think about these things. The structure of the tasks, you know, are they unstructured or very structured? Think about the work that you do. Do you sit down and know exactly what you have to do to get something done? Or is it something that's unstructured you have to sit there and think about and figure out, right, before you get it done? And then the last one on external influences. Do you know how those influence, what effect are those influences going to have? If the economy goes up, what effect is it going to have on your particular work? If the sequester hits, what effect is it going to have? The external influences can create a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity. So given that, I want you to rank order these 5 events. Now, by rank ordering, you can just put down on your piece of paper. I'm going to leave this up here for a second. I think you all have access to one or the other. There are 5 things here that you're going to rank order from 1 to 5. Okay, so if you just take a minute to do that, just got to get it out a second. Lowest ambiguity is 1, highest ambiguity is 5. And think of those 4 factors: external factors, interdepartmental differences, individual differences, and task structure. Which one's first? Which one's second? Which one's third? Time is it? 25 till? Okay, so look at your own judgment there. Is everybody pretty much ready? We'll go on to this side. Here's how 30 folks in the study that Daphne Langle did ranked the amount of uncertainty. Why is number 5 number 5? Well, you look at the external differences, right? You're trying to learn something new from a program you know nothing about. It would be highly ambiguous to you in terms of the interpretation of the information. And generally, people feel like that would be a really ambiguous task. How many of you had that close to either 4 or 5? All right, several of you, okay. And then the least ambiguous, people judged as giving a set of cost figures at the end of the month that they requested. Doesn't that fit the definition of uncertainty pretty much that we had, that it's a structured task, that we just lack the information, the end of the month we have the information, but there's really no ambiguity involved. So I hope those things are clear to you, the difference between the two, and the fact that the tasks are less ambiguous and more ambiguous is going to influence the choice of media that we have.
You know, just in terms of ambiguity, you said to me before, remind you next time not to build the slides so they build like this. You developed a slide deck. I had no idea that you didn't want them building because how would I know that?
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I mean, you know, and I would never, you know, just arbitrarily change the slides. So, you know, just in terms of just in terms of communication, you know, simple kind of thing.
I bet, you know, I'm gonna tell you when I hit the slide that she arbitrarily changed to say what she wants to. No, Chris, that's not right.
Right.
So okay, so my friend, what was my friend performing at Blues Alley? Does anyone care to guess? Stanley.
Well, I don't know what they were performing, but it looked like it was a picture of a woman singing.
Oh, Stanley. How many of you thought Chris was a woman singing? How many of you thought Chris was a saxophone player?
Yeah, the majority thought that,
well,
right?
Stan, you're very good because it could have been a woman singing, couldn't it? Do everyone see the woman singing? Okay, now you do, right? I again suckered you into thinking it was a saxophone because of the Blues Alley Jazz Club, I think. Do you see the saxophone, Stan? I do. Okay. The idea is that you can have visual ambiguity as well as you know, just vocal or verbal ambiguity. And that's something that I'll remind us of in just a second. Why is it so important to recognize? I used to be the king of animation, by the way. I gave it up. I gave it up, but I forgot to do it on these slides. Ambiguity seeps into all of our communication. And it's because of those reasons, our individual differences and so on, the context we come, the knowledge that we have, the education we've had in the background. And it's hard to recognize because of the curse of knowledge, right? That we think everybody understands as clearly as we do what we're saying. But if we're not aware of it, we can't do anything to it. We can't do anything to resolve it. And so therefore, and I encourage you really to do some research in ambiguity and to think about how you recognize ambiguity around you, because it is, I think, one of the major causes of miscommunication amongst people and amongst groups. And it's not anything intentional, it's not anything mean, it just exists and we don't think about it. We know when something's missing, we know when uncertainty exists, but we find it harder to resolve this uncertainty. I mean, the ambiguity. So the whole idea of media richness theory is that media vary in their ability to convey information. So the various tools we use have different capacity to convey information, and it's based on 4 things. Synchronicity, same time, same place, right? Or same time, different place, at least if we can talk and see to each other. That's where synchronicity comes in. We also have multiple cues, right? That not only can we talk about eating your Brussels sprouts, but we can insist that they're going to be good for you with the cues that we have. Now, here's where I put in the little warning about the sax player or the woman singing. Multiple cues can be a little bit, sometimes they can emphasize the message, but sometimes they can be a little bit ambiguous. If you've ever been in a room of kids and having an adult who's talking to them and see the rolling of eyes. I taught for 10 years at a parochial school in the area, and I can remember teaching and catching the rolling of eyes from one person to another, a physical cue, right? Some kind of gesture, which I was never sure how to interpret.
I don't think that's limited to kids in school. I think
I can't
sometimes we
see
see
well
that.
enough to
I
see how
can't see in
many
the
eyes are
audience
rolling
either,
out
but
there.
I know we've all seen that in meetings.
Yeah,
So people have to be very cautious with their behavior.
So you can also vary your language in face-to-face communication or rich media, right? You can change a word. You can see that they're not understanding. So equivocality, that one didn't work. So ambiguity, what? Oh, it means, having more than one meaning. Oh, I get that. So that kind of thing is allowed, partly because of the synchronicity. And you can also personalize. So those are the 4 characteristics of a very rich medium. And if you take those into account, what you see is that you have, up at the top, you have face-to-face communication, then you have telephone, then you have written but addressed documents. And these are the traditional media that Daft and Langle put on their media richness scale. And what they said is that rich medium are much better in conveying ambiguity, okay? And less rich medium or leaner medium are better for conveying uncertainty. Because I can send a document to somebody, I can send a text, I can send an email and say, here are your figures. But if I have to resolve what the meaning was of a person who I'm not sure I understood, I better get a richer medium and talk to them, okay? So then the question becomes, and a lot of people have done this over the years since they first wrote. Remember in the mid-'80s, these things didn't exist. There's some of you that might not know that out there. Where would you place these? Email and voice, video conferencing and voicemail and so on. Well, we can, if you think about the comparisons, we can place them somewhere on the grid based on those 4 qualities. So video conferencing gives you some kind of face-to-face, right? And in fact, we were talking about Skype before. Mm-hmm. Here's the difference between a less rich and a richer medium. My daughter my daughter Tessa spent part of her junior year in Australia, which is pretty far away. And I got a picture after her first week there. She sent pictures by text, and the picture, she looked exhausted. And I said to my wife, she's exhausted. I wonder if it's just a jet lag or what's going on. And so we Skyped on like the next morning or the next day. And she was there talking on the phone. She still looked exhausted. And I said, you look exhausted, Tess. Is that just the jet lag hanging on, or are you sick or what? And she said, no, Dad, double-decker bus ride to the bars in Cairns last night. Well, so much for clarifying the ambiguity, right, with the face-to-face communication. But it was Skype. It was that face-to-face exchange that clarified for her mother and myself what the situation was. So when you think about this whole thing, the real importance of it for us is that ambiguity is communicated better through richer media, but richer media cost more per message. And that's the rub. Stan.
So I'm kind of curious. You know, when these media platforms that aren't quite as rich, like Twitter and you know, you mentioned blogging and so forth, and then phone texting and the use of emoticons to try to convey some type of emotion, you know, put the message in a certain context. Do you see that as kind of a way of trying to increase the richness, if you will, of that whatever tool is being used? And how effective do you think those kind of things are? Because some very, very effective communicators enable their communication through the use of emotion very effectively. You know, and you had mentioned earlier how it can also be a detriment. But some of the greatest communicators we've had were great because they were able to communicate from an emotional position. And so I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, emotion is one of those cues, right? Additional cues that you can get across. You can't get it across in writing as well. I think it's a great point about the emoticons. That's exactly why they were there. If you've ever looked at a smiley face, though, you know that there's smiley face sarcastic and smiley face, you know, straight, oh, I'm just kidding kind of thing. There's still that ambiguity involved. They try to come closer. But I must say, and I meant to mention this when we looked at the list of modern media, people are aware that some of those media platforms are not as rich as face-to-face, and a lot of work is being done to enrich them. And so every day time goes by, those media get richer and richer. You can send text, you can send pictures, you can send songs. You know, there's lots of ways that you can embroider those. Or your web platforms are becoming rich media platforms because they allow you to interact with many different forms. And we're getting face-to-face in lots of different ways now with Skype and the cameras on our PCs and so on. So I think that's a really good point, Stan. People understand that those are less rich. They're making the attempt to become stronger. We got to move along, though, because we got to get to Harriet. So look at these again and think of the kind of communication and medium that you might use for these five, and think about the rankings that we had, right? Would you want the guy who's trying, or the person who's trying to convey a discipline much different than yours, to just hand you a textbook and say, read this, and when you're done, you know, write a report and come back to me, and I'll make sure I read the report and know that you understood it? That would certainly be a lean medium. It would be cheap for the person to give me the book and then go away. But that kind of an exchange is going to take much more personal contact, much more interaction with me and the person for clarification of the ambiguities. If I want to convey to my secretary, on the other hand, or my administrative assistant, how I want him to answer the phone, I'm going to have a discussion with him about those particular things, and then I might write down some rules to make sure I document it in a form that he can see. It may not have to be a face-to-face, an intense face-to-face conversation if he's an experienced administrative assistant. And lastly, the one about the costs at the end of the month, I could send an email or a text to the person and convey that information pretty quickly, low cost, and clearly. So knowing the content of the message is the most important thing. And here's a graph that came from, we'll talk about implications, but here's a graph that came from Daft and Lengel's study. And they said if you take low ambiguity and high ambiguity, and low certainty and high uncertainty, and put it on the graph, you get a pretty good description of 4 quadrants of work. And when you get these slides, you may want to apply this test to yourself and to your own work, because there should be a parallel between the kind of work you do and how structured or unstructured it is, and the kind of communications that you most frequently use. So if you're down in that lower left-hand corner where you have low ambiguity and low uncertainty, you have a lot of structured tasks that or you have at least a few structured tasks that you're doing. You know what you have to do when you come to work every day, and you know what the information is that you need to get those done. You should probably be doing a lot of desk work, some analysis, some report writing, those kinds of things. But if you find yourself up and around, gabbing to people all day long, then maybe you're not talking about work, because you probably don't need that kind of face-to-face communication as much. Whereas if you're in the upper right-hand corner, you have high ambiguity and high uncertainty, then making sure that you're out of your office, talking to the people that you have to interact with, making sure you're resolving uncertainty, meeting with your team to try to get things straightened out, that's going to be a constant in your life. I know a lot of us feel like we got meetings, meetings, meetings. Sometimes that's because we have very unstructured work because we're way up in that upper right-hand corner in terms of ambiguity, and that's what the meetings are meant to do, help us resolve it and clarify. Now, if we're having a lot of meetings down in the lower left-hand corner, then we're going to get really frustrated because we're just meeting to like hash out things people already know. Try that as one of the exercises. Here's another implication. If you start a new task or a new project, you're likely to find the ambiguity highest at the beginning of that task or project. It's going to go down as you know more and as you learn more about each other, but it's going to be highest at the beginning. This is a parallel, or this is a track of normal communications on a project. They start out low, they go higher, and they come back down. Why do they go higher? Because people recognize halfway in, or a little bit of the way in, that they got to get on the same page. I'm sure you've been there before, right? We got to get together in the same room so we get on the same page. Well, several weeks has gone by already. What does it lead to? It leads to higher costs, it leads to confusion at the beginning, and it leads to, over the length of the project, the potential that you're not going to hit what you have to hit. And so the idea is, the implication is, when you start a new task, get rich medium first. Face-to-face, phone, video conferencing, those kinds of things. Make sure you get on the right level. So implication 3, more clarity in reporting. These phrases came right from status reports that were real status reports. Just try, when you get the slides, to place these precisely on the graph in terms of knowing where those projects are from a status point of view. Okay? It's impossible to do. And so the implication is, in terms of uncertainty and clarity and ambiguity, at the beginning of the projects, establish the basis for measuring status as clearly as you can, so that later on your status reports have less uncertainty, less ambiguity to them. You can't do anything with that kind of information. Shared context is another implication. If you have a lot of ambiguity in your organization, you want to create shared context. The more you create shared context, the more you can communicate quickly and productively. And think about the things that our organizations do to do that, right? Newsletters and communities of practice and those kinds of things. They're all aimed at reducing ambiguity for the organization. The more you can build shared context in your group, the more you're going to be successful. And so lastly, the implication 5. Consider your message and consider how, this is the methodology I want you to have. Consider your message, consider the ambiguity in it, and then match the medium match the message to the medium. You want to define your audience, and you want to consider your personal style. You want to consider those other things. How familiar are you with the group? What kind of shared context do you have? And then you want to identify the appropriate media. And when you craft your communication, you want to rehearse it, even if it's face-to-face. Because because rehearsing things help us get the ambiguity out of things, okay? So that's a little methodology that you can follow. I think it works. It certainly helps me, and hopefully it's gonna help Harriet. So we come back to the beginning, right? I've got this message from Harriet, for Harriet. Should I call her or tweet? Well, it depends. Here's a message for Harriet. The answer to the question you asked me is that there's $470,050 left on the project at the last day of January. Okay? Pretty low ambiguity, right? High, the uncertainty's resolved. What can I do? I can send an email, I can send a tweet, or I wouldn't send a tweet unless I personalized it to her, I suppose. Or I can send a text message, let's say. I can send an instant message. A lot of things in the middle to lower area on rich medium, because all I got to do is get her the number. Everybody agree with that, more or less? Okay, what about this one? Sorry I couldn't make your party. Something else came up suddenly.
Now, this one was an interesting one, because we talked a lot, talk about how many times did we meet and talk in person about the presentation versus on the phone or sending other messages. This is interesting, and this could be generational even, how you would send that message out.
What was your answer?
I would want to be called, but maybe that's because I'm old.
If you were Harriet.
And yeah, maybe that's the generation I'm in. I would want to get a call because I was planning on Harriet attending for whatever reason. So I would want to be called because I would want to know what was more important than coming.
Right.
What could possibly be more important than coming to my dinner party?
Absolutely.
Right?
A lot of ambiguity in that answer.
But, let's see from the audience what people think. How would people respond? Would they respond by a text message? Would people just send text messages? I don't see any hands. It's hard for me to tell with the lights. So there's a couple people would send text messages. Okay, who would call? Would people call? See, some people would call. This is a mixed generational kind of response, though.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's perception, it's context, it's relationship, it's a whole bunch of different things.
Yep. You probably wouldn't. I wouldn't want someone just to send me a text to that effect without it, then assuming that I wanted some explanation. It was a party I was going to have. So I feel like you do. So I'm sorry, Harriet, to inform you, this is the email. This is the famous email that went out, right? Sorry to inform you that there's a reduction in force and your name is on the list. Please report to Human Resources. Dear Margaret, sorry to inform you that we're getting divorced in the morning. You'll be served papers. There are some serious messages that we would not even question that need face-to-face, rich medium, because of the amount of ambiguity and emotion involved in them. But on the other hand, you would be amazed if you go out and look at inappropriate email examples. You'd be amazed to see how many people don't understand the need for that kind of communication on the part of recipients. And someone say something?
No.
And the last example, congratulations, Harriet L. Your idea placed first among all your innovative folks. And that message got tweeted to her by the folks at Innovation. Are there any thoughts or any questions? Hopefully this has been helpful to you. I really think that the ambiguity in our communication is one of the root causes for miscommunication, and I'm hoping that as a result of this, that you're made a little bit more aware of it, and you can think through a little bit more about your communications from that point of view. And thank you very much, Dr. Cohen. Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Thank you very much for attending, and a little bit hoarse here. I'm sorry. The cold.
It was a very emotional topic.
I have a bit of a cold. We'll look for you in March. Thank you all.
Thank you all.